Hello, and welcome to Lesson 2. Today we're going to talk about light. You probably already know that light is very important to getting a great shot, but you might not know how to change the space that you're in to get the light to work in your favor. In this video, we're going to talk about why light is important, how to get the best light in your hospital room, and what to do in a dark room. Today is going to be super important to getting those beautiful photos of your baby. You're going to post those photos on Instagram, and your friends are not only going to talk about how cute your baby is, but they're going to tell you how amazing those photos are too. They'll ask if you hired someone, and you'll say, "No, my friend Kimberly taught me a thing or two about light, and it made all the difference." You ready to talk about light? I know I am. It's one thing to know that light is important, but it's another thing to know why. Photography is capturing light. Let's go back to physics for a moment. Color is light reflecting off of a surface. Light has different wavelengths, which create the different colors that we see. When there's an absence of light, or when we see things that are black, that means that there aren't any wavelength lights bouncing off of that surface. That's why when things are not well lit, they appear dark. To make great photos, we want to have great light, and not all light is the same. Light has different color temperatures. Light bulbs tend to be a lot more yellow than natural light. This can be seen on the Kelvin chart below this video. Because light has different color temperatures, having two different types of light in one photo can make it look sloppy, or worse, make it impossible to color correct. You don't need to worry about setting the Kelvin on your camera, but know that different light can cause weird color casts. In the next slides, I'll talk more about how to prevent that, but let's talk a little bit more about the importance of light. The less light in the room where you're taking the photos, the higher the chance that it can cause blurriness or graininess. When you have low light in your room, the camera is going to compensate by slowing down the shutter speed and increasing the ISO. As the shutter speed gets slower, the chance for blur becomes higher. You might be thinking, well, my baby isn't moving around, I don't need to worry about blur. And that is not the case, my friend. Blur can happen just from you holding the camera. The more light you have in the room, the higher the shutter speed will become, thus reducing the chance for blurry photos. Now, onto ISO. That's how sensitive your sensor is in your camera. The chip can increase in sensitivity, but it loses some valuable information. That's how grain occurs. Now, if you don't know what grain is, think about a crime show. Certainly, they'll have a photo of a suspect, but they can't tell who he is because his face looks like a bunch of dots. That's grain. Unfortunately, image enhancers to get rid of grain aren't a real thing, so we better get it right in camera first. Make sure the room is bright enough so that the ISO isn't too high, and you will not have grain. If your room is well lit and your camera is set to auto, you will have a high enough shutter speed to reduce blur and a low enough ISO to prevent grain. It's one thing to know that you need great light, it's another to know how to get it. Let's dive a little deeper into color temperature. You may have noticed that some light bulbs look a little bit warmer or more yellow than others. Those have a color temperature around 3000 Kelvin. Daylight is much cooler or bluer. Having multiple color temperatures in one photo can confuse your camera, or worse, create images that cannot be color corrected. Here are some examples of how different temperature light affects your photos. Look at the photo on the left. In this photo, there are two light sources, the window and a lamp. You can see there is an orange cast coming from the left side. That's where the lamp is. Then the floor becomes cooler or bluer as it goes to the right. That's where the window is. The white plate also doesn't look very white. Parts of it look bluish and some has an orange hue. Now let's look at the photo on the right. There is only one light source used in this photograph. That's the window. You can see that the floor is a consistent color temperature, and there aren't any weird or funky color casts happening in here. Let's take a look at these two photos. The ISO in the photo on the left is at 500, and the one on the right is a very high 16,000 ISO. Increasing your ISO is a great way to compensate for photographing in a room with low light, but be careful. The higher the ISO, the more grain can occur. Look at the plate on the right. There are tons of tiny little dots. That's because the camera has to make an educated guess about what those pixels should be. The photo on the left side is a lot smoother. There's a lot less grain because the ISO is lower. So, how do you get that awesome light in a potentially not so awesome looking room? Well, here's how. Step 1, open up all the blinds. This will let in all that natural, beautiful light. Most hospital rooms that I've been in have large or at least very tall windows that let in a good amount of light. By opening the blinds fully, you're letting in as much of that beautiful natural light as possible. Step 2, take the photos when you have good natural light. You're smart, so I'm sure that you know that opening up the blinds at 3 a.m. isn't going to create photo magic. The best time of day will vary depending on what direction your window is facing, but typically around midday is a good time to take these photos. The sun is high and there won't be any crazy direct light blaring in through the windows. Step 3, turn off all the other lights in the room, and yes, that means the TV too. As talked about a few minutes ago, mixing different light can cause funky color casts, therefore creating not so beautiful images. If all the light in the room is approximately the same color temperature, it'll be easy for your camera to figure out how to white balance those images. White balance is the adjustment your camera makes to make the white parts of your image look white. As long as you have one light source, the window, your camera will be smart enough to figure that out on auto. Make sure you also turn off the bathroom light. You might think, that light is in another room, it's not really going to matter. From photographing in hospital rooms, I'm here to tell you that it will. In the times that I've made that mistake, there's a weird orange light coming from one side of the room. That can make your camera's auto white balance get all wonky, and we don't want that. I'm sure you've had photos where the color is just off and you aren't able to put any filter on that image to make it look good in color. So now it's just going to be a black and white photo. By turning off all lights and using only one light source, you'll avoid that. To recap, open up all the blinds, shut off all the lights, turn off the TV, turn off the light in the bathroom, and by doing all these things, this will help you get the best light your room has to offer. Now, let's talk about where to position the baby in the photos. I love to push the bassinet as close to the window as I can. The light will be the best and brightest there. If you happen to get direct sunlight in your room at the time that you're taking the photos, you can move the bassinet into the shadow. That'll create a nice, soft, diffused light. Or you can also just wait until the sun is moved and the natural light is flooding into your room as indirect sunlight. When you're photographing your beautiful baby in this nice natural light, make sure you don't get in the way of that light. We'll talk in another lesson about camera angles more specifically, but for now, just know that you don't want to block that light source with your body. Don't get between the window and your baby, creating a shadow. So, photographing your baby in the bassinet by the window is great for a number of reasons. They're safe in there. They're elevated, so they have a good amount of light coming in and hitting them from the window. It really embraces the realness of the first few days and helps tell their story. And you can also rotate the bassinet a lot easier to get the light on baby's face without having to fuss with baby. So bassinets are on wheels, just give it a little rotate and you can find that best light without having to move baby at all. Unfortunately, there are some dark rooms out there. Some hospital rooms have tiny windows, are in corners, or have windows blocked by trees. I'm here to tell you that you can still get beautiful images in rooms like that. You just have to learn a few more tricks from your friend Kimberly. As talked about in the last slide, we want to try to use one light source. Mixing different light sources can confuse your camera and create photos that have wonky color casts. That means trying to have only one light source on in the room. Don't turn on every light to try to get it to be the brightest. Hospital lights can be all different types of color temperature. Oftentimes, there will be one bright light above the bed that's right at the head of the bed. This tends to bounce off the ceiling and fill the room with the best light. If your dark room has a light like this and it provides enough light to fill up the room, use this one. If it doesn't, try to find a light that fills up the room the best. Just like the window, the closer the baby is to that light, the brighter it'll be for photos. That means don't turn the light on above the bed and then photograph your baby on the opposite side of the room. It might seem like the light is the same, but your camera is a lot more sensitive than your eyes. and you will get the best photos when your subject is closer to that light source. Let's say you have a camera where you can adjust settings. There are a few things that you can do to get better images. One of my favorites is to open up the aperture. On your camera, in the aperture setting, lower the number. The lower the number, the larger your aperture will be open, thus letting in more light. Aperture doesn't just control light, it also affects how much of your image is in focus. The lower the number on your aperture setting, the less that'll be in focus. That's how you get those soft images with the blurred background and the in-focus subject. It's by lowering the aperture. You can also decrease the shutter speed, but try your best not to go below 1/100th of a second. Really, anything under 1/200th of a second can cause blur, but once you get below 1/100th, you are in blur territory, my friend. As you make your shutter speed slower, try to make sure you hold the camera steady. Lastly, you can increase the ISO. As we talked about before, having a high ISO can cause grain. That's why we don't want to go crazy on this. Each camera is different, but most cameras these days are pretty safe up to 1000 ISO. Once you start getting higher into the 1600 or 3200 range, you are entering grain city. Let's stay out of grain city. Try to keep your ISO at 800 or lower, and only go up if you really need to. Here we are at the action steps for today's lesson. Today we talked about how to get the best light in any hospital room. Now, you probably don't have a hospital room to practice in, but you do have rooms in your house. It's time to start practicing what you learned. You can practice with a doll or stuffed animal, or better yet, your partner. Practice getting the best light by following the checklist below this video. Photograph in a room using only natural light that comes in from the window. And then also practice in a room without great natural light. This way, when you get to the hospital, you will have already practiced these steps and you'll know how to get the best light in your room. The best thing about getting the hang of understanding great light is that you can apply this to all types of photography, not just photographing newborn babies. So that's all. Grab your camera and get to clicking. I'll see you in lesson 3.